All right, so again, welcome everybody. Today we're going to be looking at chapter two, our presentation for chapter two. I want to bring this up on the side here so I can see people's names. Everybody's clear. Everybody can see this. This is large enough for everybody.
Yes, sir.
It is okay. Cool. All right, so of course, in the last chapter, we sort of like put the framework together. In this chapter, what we're going to spend some time doing is looking at leadership across the board. And primarily, we're going to be trying to go through some of the theories and some of the genesis information for leadership studies across the board. So let's start off where the chapter begins, looking at the nature of leadership. And often, what you find happening is that in the world around us, especially if in the world of work, leadership positions are seen as some sort of ideal towards for everybody to kind of aspire towards. So positions of leadership often are seen as they say here, a prized or coveted position in organizations or in society. Um, the people who are involved with these leaders vary, of course. Some people don't like their leaders, and some people love their leaders, and we have the whole spectrum of responses that comes between. So, the point that they're trying to make here is that oftentimes leadership, which comes with a lot of responsibility, is seen as something that people want to get to, and once they achieve it, they sort of kind of pause there. I reach, where I'm going. I'm the CEO, I'm the managing director, I'm the whatever you are for whatever company or organization. You're the president, you're the prime minister, that type of stuff. But leadership comes with a lot of work. And just like yourselves, I mean, you have had mixed reactions to leaders around you. Some of them you like, some of them you don't like. The problem with it is that when we start looking at leadership, we will start to realize, as McGregor Burns puts here, it's one of the most observed but least understood phenomenons in the world. And that is going to be painfully obvious when we start to look at all of the type of research that was done about it. There are lots and lots of programs. This is a list of some of the programs that I am familiar with, and there are like hundreds of these. Any of these look familiar to any of you guys? Have any of you participated in any of these programs or read any of these books for self development or just for self interest? Nobody?
Seven
Yes,
Habits of Highly
Stephen
Effective
Covey. Yeah, I
People.
have that one.
Hmm. Have you ever read it?
Yeah.
You read it? Okay. I actually did the program, Seven Habits of Highly Effective People. In fact, I have an emblem here called a talking stick. Don't know if you all could see it. This was one of the items that came with that program when we paid to do that program. In fact, interestingly enough, the week we were doing that program, because it's a week long program, um, that was the week that Stephen Covey died. He got in an accident in Utah and he died, a bicycle accident of all things. Um, it was a surreal type of experience because I know the people who were running the training were very upset with the whole process. We actually had have a bit of a um, almost a uh, almost like a funeral service or memorial service there, where they gave witness to the type of impact that their program leader had on them. It was quite interesting. But the idea here is there's a follow up book to Seven Habits. Huh? You're familiar with it? There's another one called, I think, the something about the eighth item or something like that. But this is just one of a number of programs that I was involved with. You all are going to be utilizing this program, this book here, as part of the program. I've done this ELP. This is the Executive Leadership Program as well, and I did another one called the Leadership Challenge. From We had a university lecturer from the University of Virginia come and present that to us pretty early on. it was quite an interesting experience. But there are lots and lots of programs. There are lots of people, like Tony Robbins here is one of the more popular ones, um, who go about doing programs to help people to, develop their leadership skills and develop their leadership potential. Now, the problem is that because leadership is something that is intangible, it makes it very difficult to define because leadership means so much to different people, and it's seen by different people in such a broad sense, or different ideas about it. It creates problems when we try to nail it down and define it. All right, because as many people as there exist, uh, you could get as many interpretations of what leadership is all about. At the end of the day, however, despite what we're trying to do in terms of define it, we want our leaders, when they arrive in positions of power, to find solutions for the problems that we face. Isn't that what we hope our leaders get? So we had a recent change in government. We're hoping that they are able to, solve some of the issues that we're facing. I've listed a number of these here: climate change, globalization, poverty, healthcare, education, public services. Can you think of other things that could be on this list, particularly for Trinidad and Tobago? What are some of the key things that you're looking for the government of Trinidad and Tobago to treat with now?
To stay
Candace.
out of people business and not get us bombed.
Okay, that is what you're talking about there is the geopolitics of the area. Stay out of people's business. I don't know if we could actually stay out of that. I don't know how much because we don't have an army, and if the US decides to bomb, we are not to do that. All right. Anyway, what are some of the other things besides what Candace is talking about? What else comes to mind?
Inflation, unemployment, crime.
Crime, okay. Inflation, unemployment really has to do with a broader thing of economic welfare and economic development. But inflation is one. Do we have high levels of inflation?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Do we
Yes.
really? Okay. What is the rate of inflation currently? Do you know?
I know last week the milk was $5 less than it was yesterday.
All right. Okay. So what you're trying to say is food inflation is going up, not necessarily overall inflation. I saw somebody's hand up just now there. Who was that?
That was me, Sue.
Uh huh. Go ahead.
So I think a big one right now as the budget coming up also is people's salaries. That's been a big
Yeah.
thing.
Okay. Yeah. Parity with salaries and cost of living. That I think is the bigger issue in terms of inflation, because inflationary pressures are coming from outside of Trinidad and Tobago. Because we don't produce a lot of our goods, we have very limited control. Related to that, of course, would be forex issues. And our problems with forex is that we're not producing as much as we used to do in the past to earn foreign exchange, and that's creating problems in our economy in terms of our inability to meet the demand that exists in our society at this point in time. All right, now while you're all thinking about this, give me a second, and I'm hearing something kind of weird outside, and I just want to check on it before I get settled in this. Hold a second, please. All right, sorry about that. Thanks, guys. Just had to go check on what was happening. All right. Crap. Okay. Did somebody come in who wasn't here before? Seeing 23 of us.
Not sure, sir.
21. Okay, no, it's the same amount. All right, cool. Let me get back on point here now. All right. Okay, so crime is another big issue that I think is or inability to control crime. That those are things we want our leaders to be dealing with, and of course, as you all talked about, economic issues, incomes, prices, those kind of things. Those are very important areas that we're going to want them to pay attention to. But what happens is when they don't find the issues they don't solve the issues, we get disappointed. And that then leads us into this particular situation here where we started to develop a lot of distrust in the leadership around us. And we start to get vocal in our disappointment and distrust. And it creates something called the anti leadership vaccine. Now, the text describes this as a situation in which people become less willing to take on the responsibilities of leadership because of the amount of distrust that society shows towards people in leadership positions and the sort of actions that take place that, it makes it like not worth the person's while to get involved with any sort of leadership, especially in politics, because it's a lot of nasty things can happen. A lot of people say nasty things about you, about people in leadership positions in political arenas. And of course, people cast aspersions to what people are doing. So that creates a situation where the people who are probably better suited for leadership positions refuse to take on the challenge. Um, and this creates a bit of a problem because if the best people in your society are not willing to take up those leadership positions, what are we going to be left with? Well, we tend to get left with what? Anybody? Less qualified people, not so, to take up those leadership positions. And that means a lot of times we have the wrong people or or well what we call square pegs in round holes. Make sense?
Yes,
All
sir.
right. Mm-hmm. All right. Now, when we talk about leadership, there are lots of myths that exist in terms of what leadership is all about. So these are some of the myths that permeate the concepts of leadership. Leaders are born, not made. Leadership is hierarchical, and you need to hold formal positions and status to be able to be considered a leader. You have to be charismatic to be an effective leader. There is one way of leading. It is impossible for you to be both a manager and a leader at the same time. And you really only need to have common sense to be an effective leader. We hear these things a lot. So let's start to deal with what are the truths about leadership. So this course would not exist if leaders are born. And we're going to spend some time looking at how this concept of born leaders came about. And we're going to be looking at how leadership is not something that's genetic. It's not something that only a small group of individuals can aspire towards. And we are going to well, in fact, you all are going to debate this topic. It's one of the debate topics. A person's environment, a person's culture, a person's upbringing and their personal characteristics all contribute towards leadership. So there, some people may seem to be predisposed to leadership, but it doesn't mean that without training, they will become a leader. Because I've seen that happen a lot. People who I've grown up with in from primary school moving forward, they show some innate sort of leadership potential, but Without proper guidance, without proper nurturing, without proper education, they can't fulfill those things. Whereas there are people who showed no leadership potential who end up in leadership positions in the future. So um, um, there's no there's no truth to the thing that leaders are born. You have to be made a leader. All right. So that's one first thing. Charisma is not a prerequisite of about leadership. Right. So I skipped one here. Um, so we'll come back to charisma in a little bit. In most modern organizations, you realize that they are moving away from that leadership in a hierarchical situation. Most organizations are sort of trying to flatten out their organization because um, when you have a situation where the leader or leadership decision making is housed in one part of the organization, it slows an organization down, especially as the organization begins to get larger. Larger organizations require a distilling of leadership around the organization. So what you start having is sub leaders working at different levels of the organization to be able to make decisions about the operations of the organization. Top leadership should be focused on future driven activities and future driven focus. Yes, they have to pay attention to the day to day running, but they ought to leave that to the people who are on the floor because their input is generally going to be one of more guidance and vision as opposed to the person who is helping to run the factory floor, who's paying attention to what's taking place there, those types of things. You have that organizational shift. So that it means that leadership has to happen at all levels. It can't just be housed only in the office of the president of the company or the prime minister of a country. Leadership has to take place at all different levels of the organization for it to be more effective across the board. So coming back to charisma, charisma is not a prerequisite for leadership. In fact, charisma is a dangerous element that a lot of leadership study has shown us. The reason for that is charisma is not something that you can pretend. It's not something that you yourself are going to be aware of. Charisma is something that other people put on you as a leader. And that the impact of charisma is one that tends to be subjective. It's emotive in nature. And a lot of leaders who have been seen to be charismatic have done some dangerous things in the past. In fact, Drucker reflected on the three most charismatic leadership individuals in the last century killed the most amount of people. And we've talked about some of these people already. Hitler, Stalin, and the new name here is Mao. Anybody's familiar with who that is? When he refers to Mao?
No, sir.
No. Anybody of you are familiar with how China became um, a communist country?
Not really, sir, but I know that North Korea is like a dictatorship.
Well, North Korea doesn't have anything to do with China. They were part of the whole problem. But China became a a communist state under the leadership of a gentleman called Chairman Mao. During the years of adjustment, when it's called the Long March, during that period where the country was making its adjustment away from capitalism into communism, a lot, more than 7 to 8 million people died during that process. Chinese people. Um, you don't hear a lot about it because history doesn't really cover it, because it was during that period of time in the Chinese history, the country kind of blanketed itself and cut itself off from the rest of the world. And in fact, it's one of the reasons why they became self-sufficient, because one of the biggest problems that China had was feeding itself. Because remember, China has one of the world's largest populations. They have so many people there that they had to instill a one child per family rule. Right now, I think only recently they expanded it to two children per family. So they're still regulating um, um, the amount of children any family can have because of the problem they had with feeding their population. And during the period of their their rise or their establishment as a communist state, the people suffered a great deal, primarily through starvation, a lot of it through education. Um, um, Korea got involved with that or was influenced by that, but the North Koreans is a dictatorship. That's a different thing. Um, some of this was also related to what happened in Vietnam, because you had that sort of what they call the Red Scare down in that area as a result of communism. But right next to China is Russia, and at the same time, Stalin was in Russia, developing the Soviet Union. So the two countries were like this communist bloc, which was what they referred to back in those days. So these are charismatic leaders. So we spoke already about this gentleman here, Adolf Hitler. Anybody recognizes this gentleman here?
Mahatma
Charisma.
Gandhi.
What is he known for? What did he do?
So he helped India achieve independence.
Hmm. He did quite true, um, and he was assassinated for it because of one of the byproducts of India's independence was the secession of Pakistan, and that led to a lot of painful revolutionary activities between India and Pakistan. To this day, they inherited this issue and problem. And if you go back into the history of Pakistan and India, you'd realize that was sort of created by the British and their colonialist rule. We of course we know this gentleman here, Martin Luther King. What movement was he with again? Anybody remembers? With the civil rights movement. You all
Yes,
know
sir.
that. Anybody is familiar with the "I Have a Dream" speech?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, that's very famous type of thing. What about this gentleman here with the shades? Anybody recognizes him?
Not really.
Well, that so far that's
His
Nikita.
face looks I can't remember his name, but is he the guy from Guyana?
Uh huh. Well, he did
But
his deed in Guyana. Yes.
Jim
right.
Jones?
Oh, that's
Jim
the
Jim.
part.
Jim
Jones,
No, no, no.
Ah,
yes.
Yep.
Jones.
You have to
Jim
say it
yes,
right.
Jones.
my
It's the right
Yes.
goodness.
Okay.
Reverend Jim Jones.
Yeah.
You could
Right.
see the
And he was responsible for the suicide of his entire cult, including children. And the phrase that you may hear some people talking about drinking Kool-Aid comes from what happened with him, because how they administered the poison was mixing it in Kool-Aid, um, and giving it to the children to drink, and the adults drank it. He himself, he shot himself. He didn't take the poison. He blew his brains out with a gun. Um, but if you look at the history of Jim Jones and his movement, you'd realize that he was seen as a highly charismatic leader who had problems with the church that he was in and started his own church. Something for you to think about. Alongside that, you could think about Waco, Texas, and the Branch Davidians. You're familiar with that
Yes, sir.
story?
It has a
Yeah.
documentary.
Yes. Look at those things. In fact, I would encourage you all to look at movies that are more they're entertaining, but they're also educational in terms of telling the story about Jim Jones or about Mahatma Gandhi or even Hitler as well, and other cult leaders, because this is the problem of charisma. Charismatic individuals appeal to people at an emotional level, and you motivate people to do things that you wouldn't normally do. And generally, they come around or they become involved in circumstances where there is social unrest. So, Hitler, for example, rose to power during a period of absolutely economic problems in Germany. Germany had come out of World War One, being blamed for the war and being made to pay the rest of the world off in terms of recompensing or I think repatriation was the phrase that was utilized, and as a result, the German people were under a lot of pressure to make these payments to the rest of the world, and that punishment that was levied on the people of Germany at the time led to the first time we had something called hyperinflation, where um, the value of money was falling so rapidly that there was no way to keep track of the of prices. So they used to talk about stories of a guy was coming on the road to buy some groceries with a barrel full of money, and he couldn't get the barrel in the shop, the barrel in the shop. So he left the barrel outside, went inside to make the purchases, came outside and found the money on the ground, but the barrel was gone because nobody wanted the money, but the barrel was much more valuable because it had, it had use. So they always talked about that particular type of incidents to tell you how bad or how poor the value of the German mark at that point in time came. And he came up in during that period of time and provided explanations and solutions to the problems that they were having. One of the problems that he identified was the Jewish people and their control of the economic system, and a whole other set of things that we will have to examine a little bit here. All right. Another truth about leadership: there's not one right way to lead. There are multiple ways to lead, and that happens because leaders develop their own styles and approaches, and it's dependent upon who they are, their culture, their sex, their personal value system. It also changes based upon the context in which the leadership is being practiced. So, leadership in the army, for example, or military setting, is one that is um, very stringent, very authoritative in nature, whereas leadership in a social group would be um, more one of motivational and inspirational. Um, you could probably even look at the difference in leadership in your own household. If you have a mother and father, and you're able to compare their leadership practices, it might be interesting. Or if you have a number of leaders in your church, for example, you might be more what's the word I want to use? You might be more amenable to listen to one individual more than another based upon their leadership style. So there's not one right way to lead. Leadership is dependent upon a lot of other conditionalities, both from the position of the person themselves as well as the context in which they're practicing leadership. The other myth was leadership, you can't be a manager and a leader at the same time. The dichotomy here with management and leadership is that management is focused on achieving the goals of an organization. Primarily, the goal that they're looking at is the goal of ensuring that the company is remains in a profitable position or profitable situation. The manager's success is seen through the ability of him to be able or her to be able to get the organization into that profit making motive. The part of it though is that in managing an organization, you also have to be engaged in managing the people. So inside of the management of people, you're going to have leadership opportunities. So the question of you can't be a leader and manager at the same time is not right, because management and leadership go kind of hand in hand. In order for you to get the best out of people, you have to be able to lead them into the the type of productivity that you're looking for. It doesn't mean that you're going to be doing leadership activities all the time, but from time to time you're going to engage in leadership activities as a manager. Now, for any of you all who may have supervisory or management experiences, you may already be familiar with this. Sometimes when you're sitting down with a subordinate or an employee, and they're having a problem, you sitting and listening to them and helping them work through their problems, because inadvertently, if they are unsettled, it means that they're going to have a hard time doing the job that you want them to. Helping them work through that, that's a leadership activity. The management activity is going to be when you're sitting down, you're setting up timetables, doing quotas, doing costing, that type of stuff. That's management based activity, occupational decision making in terms of production runs and that type of stuff. All those things are managerial in nature, but inspiring workers to do the best, helping them cope with the stresses of day-to-day living and day-to-day working, being a friend to your and list to people around you, hearing their concerns and acting upon the suggestions. That's leadership activity. So there's no truth in the matter that leadership and management can't take place simultaneously. You can engage in both. All right. So that's the main takeaway from this particular area. Um, but what you can do is you can definitively say some of the activities that a manager will be engaged in as more management oriented, whereas some of the stuff that they're going to be engaged in is going to be leadership oriented, which is one of the reasons why a lot of people who get into senior management positions must do leadership studies, because oftentimes people arrive in positions of management, but they don't have the leadership component, or the leadership development necessary for them to be a leader in their organization. They're really good at managing, getting the work done, but the dealing with the people is the issue that they're probably going to be faced with. Some of you may have experienced that. Can anybody give me a for instance from the class who might be able to see that distinction between people who are managers and people who are leaders? Yes, Victoria.
Hi. So yes, this hit the nail for me because I actually experienced it recently. I was promoted and I work in the organization for some years. And the people that my, well, the department is the same persons. So now I was part of the cohort, now I'm over the cohort, and that changed the dynamics or the
Yes.
relationships.
Mm-hmm.
And now I had to see, not separate myself, but listen, it was very challenging at first because I had to stop thinking operational and start thinking strategic. So
Mm-hmm.
it required me to approach things differently, even preparing the reports and all. I had
Yep.
to step away from the details and put it in a strategic way so that it aligns with the mission and goals of the organization. So it was really something to experience, and I'm still going through in-house training sessions we do with Udemy,
Uh-huh.
and it's it's still going on.
Yeah, it will
It's
it
an
will
ongoing thing
yes,
because
it
it's
will.
really about the people. Even though you may know the work
Mm-hmm.
and you may be qualified for the job, it's personalities. And if I have 8 persons in my department and it's
That's all.
8 different personalities I have to deal with. So I had to find a way to escape so that I don't feel overwhelmed by all these personalities. So I could still get my job done. So yeah, that was my experience.
Well, it's going to be your experience for a while as long as you're there. And I want to say, fortunately for you, you're doing this course now because it ought to be able to help you um, get to know yourself a little better and probably provide some strategies for you to utilize to help to manage this.
Oh
Um,
yes, that was one thing that I realized. I was confronted with myself because
mhm.
things I would want to say, I can't say it. Things I would normally, when I say normally,
I know
things
it.
I
I
would
know.
normally say, I really cannot say. And to
Mm.
hold your tongue is so much energy to do that.
No, it's true. That's
It
quite true.
sometimes it could be overwhelming.
Well, you have to find methods of releasing that tension or that energy because if you keep it within you, it will eat away at you, and it generally starts to exhibit itself in a form of illness. So be careful with that. Huh? Find a way to release that negativity. All right. So this is good sharing. Thank you very much. All right. So I think this is the last point here. Leadership is teachable. Um, we talked about this before. Everybody can learn leadership. It's not common sense. There's a lot of skills that are required to develop, and this is what Victoria is now referring or alluding to in what she's talking about. Leadership brings together a set of skills and attitudes and aptitudes that are not necessarily um, easy to come by just by guessing at it or just by doing it on a day-to-day basis. You're going to have to go through a process of getting to know yourself and understanding what's going on, dealing with people, and unfortunately, it's going to be a process of trial and error. Learn from your mistakes. Don't beat yourself up for the mistakes. Re examine what you're doing, and it'll be an ongoing process. As long as you're sitting in that position of supervisory or management, you're going to have to be constantly honing these skills. Fortunately, though, these skills are teachable. Therefore, it's not something that is a mystery. But hopefully, Victoria and others in this class will be able to to benefit from this in terms of it leading to you improving your leadership skills and leadership attitudes and leadership styles. Okay. All right. So interesting. So let's start looking at defining this word or this concept leadership. So the term leader, according to the text, can be traced to in the English language to about the 1300s. The word leadership emerged in the 1800s and was primarily used in the context of political influence. There were very few formal definitions of leadership that existed between the 1900s and 1929. After that, by the 1980s, you had 110 different definitions, primarily coming out of academia. You had 221 definitions found in books and scholarly material, 366 publications on leadership that didn't include any form of definition, they just talked about it in a generic sense. So, what we see is moving from a position of very little work to now this explosion of material about leadership and leadership exercises. First early known definition is from Mumford, 1905, 1906, 1907. He defined leadership as the preeminence of one or a few individuals in a group in the process of control of societal phenomenon. So Mumford's definition really sits as a sort of master of puppets, somebody who works either directly or indirectly to control events in society. This master of puppets approach to leadership is a sort of sinister look of leadership. It actually originates from some of the Machiavellian philosophies that some of the earlier kings utilized, where he pulled that definition from. Um, and we'll see where that comes in to do. So, as opposed to that early definition in 1906 to contemporary definitions that we have today, we see leadership seen as a relational process based upon mutual goals and action, working towards some sort of commonality, some sort of mutual gain. Other aspects is level of integration between leaders and followers working together to accomplish it. So you'd see the dichotomy or the polarized positions of the definitions of leadership, moving from the puppet master to almost the sage on the side, and the kind of guide on the side situation where we have workers and leaders following, working together to accomplish their goals and actions. So you'd realize there's a wide gulf between those two early definitions to current definition or current thinking that we're going to have to go through and understand how do we get from that first one to where we are now. So primarily the vast majority of work that we're going to be looking at and has to be looked at from the areas of the academian fields that contributed to the development of the leadership theories that we're going to be looking at. So we're going to be looking at anthropology, psychology, history, sociology, psychiatry, the arts, philosophy. We're going to look at all of these different disciplines on how they contributed to the development of the thinking and definitions and models of leadership that we're going to be dealing with today. So, definitions of leadership. Today we know that there is not one correct definition of leadership. And this brings us back to that same question of what is leadership, and is leadership something that holds on its own, or do we must give into the context in which leadership is taking place? And that actually is really important for us to remember. Now, the problem of leadership led to metaphoric definitions. Now, what is a metaphor? Anybody remembers? Ms. Brown or Ms. Farrell? Any one of you all can remind me what is a metaphor? No? Mitchell?
So it's the comparison of two well object using without using like and so it's basically saying something is something, but you're comparing.
All right, so you're making a comparative that is not fully stated. So
Yeah.
as a right, so a simile is a comparison using as or like, whereas a metaphor is a under or implicit comparative. All right, okay, so we understand what that means. So when I say metaphoric definition, so we have the leadership definition that comes from the competitive market metaphor. What does that bring to mind? Oh, well, forget about these definitions here for the hour. Why would somebody use metaphors? Why would anybody use this tool called metaphors? What's its usefulness? Dun, 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 dun.
So you can be able to visualize it.
You could visualize. Why should I be able to visualize it, Miss Eastman?
When you visualize it, you probably understand it better and you see the
Uh-huh.
concept better.
So basically, what we try to do with metaphors is create a picture of something that we already know and compare it to a new concept so that we can see the relationship. That makes sense? Cheryl, is that what you're hinting at?
Yes, sir. Yes.
All right. Okay. So it's one of the reasons why when you read a lot, you're gonna come across books that use there's a particular one. Anybody remembers this tool giving inanimate objects human qualities? There's a term for that.
Personification.
Personification.
Personification. That's a form of a higher metaphor. By giving uh, something that is inherently intangible human qualities or something that we are already familiar with, it helps us to understand it better. So all of these different metaphors here are attempts by people, different ideas, to get us to understand what is leadership by using it in comparison with something that you should already know. So for when we talk about the competitive market, that actually speaks to economists. So in economists and people who deal with finance, when we talk about the competitive market, we know that in the competitive market, the leader in that market is the one that is able to dominate the market by having the most amount of consumers for their particular product or the most amount of users for their particular service. That's competition. And that competitive market gives rise to a leader developing. So that's the concept they're trying to say. They're saying, okay, in this case, leadership is like the competitive market. The collective bargaining, for example, that comes out of labor unions. So collective bargaining means that the group that is able to represent the vast majority of workers is the one that will have the most amount of power. That's what collective bargaining is all about. And that gives that union leadership. All right. Now, we don't have to learn any of this. I just want you to understand that this was an attempt to try and make leadership demystified, because that was the problem in a lot of instances uh, that we keep on coming across. Is leadership is not something you can put your finger on. It's not something you can kneel down somewhere and look at it and examine it. It's something that exists but in an intangible format, so that it becomes very difficult to kneel down and to hold in place. Now, one of the metaphors that I like was the orchestral or symphony metaphor. That leadership is like running an orchestra. So this is an orchestra here. Anybody here is a musician, plays an instrument, or at
Yes,
least
sir.
plays. Faithful, what do you do? What type of instrument do you play?
Violin.
So sorry, what? Pan?
Violin.
Violin. So are you do you use your violin in the context of an orchestra, or are you just learning this instrument as a something that you want to do?
Well, I used to play it in an orchestra.
Which orchestra is that?
Well, it was more religious.
That's okay. It's still music. It doesn't matter. Um,
Yeah.
right. So it was in your church.
Yeah.
It was in your
Yes,
church.
sir.
How many members was did your orchestra made up of?
I would say roughly 15, 20.
All right, and you had the different voices. When we say different voices, different instruments giving different voices.
Yeah. Yeah,
Right,
they were different instruments.
right. So tell me, what are some of the other instruments? Are we seeing, like, for instance, we're seeing the violins here in the first and second row. Um, you had anybody doing cello,
Yeah. We had one cellist,
bass,
pianist. Yeah,
pianist?
bass. Yeah.
Uh-huh. You had any flute or or trumpets or
Yeah.
anything like that? Brass?
Yeah.
A brass
Flutes and
section?
trumpets. Yeah.
Flute and trumpet, right? That sounds like a really good thing. And the gentleman in the middle here, what is their responsibility? The guy in the middle with the stick.
Well, they are the yeah, they are the like organizers. They're telling you when to play, like they orchestrate everything that you have to do.
All right. Okay. So that's great, because then you have a good idea of what it might take to become a conductor. All right. And how much you're dependent upon the other folks around you, because he can't do anything about the playing of the instrument, but he's just there to facilitate everybody getting their bits and pieces of the piece that you're playing done correctly. Is that right?
Yes,
Would you
sir.
agree? Right? Okay. And that's a huge particular thing. Now, a lot of us are not very familiar with this particular type of orchestration, because it's not very popular here in Trinidad. I know you said you were playing religious pieces, but who wrote the music for it? or did you all play by ear?
Um, some were maybe classicals. I won't say classicals, but like not written by maybe members of the church, but
Hmm.
some most of the music they have written pieces for.
Right. So you had sheet music to go with it, right? Because all these guys have these
Yeah, you have
music,
sheets.
sheet music. All right, good. So you also you don't only play an instrument, you also read music and you sight read, right? That's excellent.
Yes.
That's all. It's a lot of work. Are you in the music department for the college?
No, sir.
How come you didn't do the music degree? That would have been interesting. Um, all right, so you're getting some of you are getting this idea here, but what we tend to be is we're more familiar with this format here, and I'll show the picture and then come back to the reading it. When we go to parties or we go to fests and stuff like that, we will see a bunch of guys up on stage, everybody playing an instrument. So you see somebody on the drums, somebody on the guitar, somebody on the keyboards. You might see a couple of guys playing brass pieces, three or four people possibly. There'll be a singer and a couple of other singers, but we don't really pay attention to what's happening in the back because we focused on the activities of the fellas in front or the individuals in front because these days we have a lot of female acts that participate. Most of you all here should be familiar with that, right? Just by a show of hands, most of you all familiar with that. You're not familiar with it? One person familiar. What?
Familiar with what, sir?
Soca bands, going and seeing bands perform or just looking at them on television, I guess.
Oh, yes.
Like
Yeah?
Esteban.
Yes, like that. There we go.
A
Kestiban
fet,
is
sir. So you have to say
a
fet.
well, no, it doesn't have to be a fet, but they do shows now, huh?
Well, sir,
So,
yeah,
ma,
we know we have concerts and stuff, but
correct. But again, you still have all these acts that come together, and you have a set of musicians working at the back, and they're supporting the frontline performers. Correct? Yes.
correct.
Right. And when they tell you take it down, what do you mean by that?
Slow down the music.
Right. So some of the instruments stop playing and you just have the beat holding in the back there, or you just hear the kick going by itself, right? So those things are rehearsed and we know that, right? Now think about if one of the so anybody here might have been familiar with people like Roy Keith, for example, excellent musician who passed away unfortunately, or Wayne Bruno, who was a one of the teachers here in Costad, but ran his own um, Kaiso show and had his own band and stuff. They were band leaders. And these band leaders had to work at choosing the music that they were going to perform, finding the musicians, and then getting them to perform. But in so doing, he had to depend upon a lot of stuff, the environment that they were working in, which would include the just the physical space that they're working on, the stage setup, the sound system, the monitoring system, all of those things are part of the environment. The people in the band who they're playing for, be them volunteers or paid workers or paid musicians, I should say, the need for everybody to perform at their very best, both as individual performers as well as within the group, because we know we've had this situation for those people who might be more familiar from sports. You could pull together the best performing players from around the world and pull them into a group and put them to play against another team, and they perform like rubbish because there's no coordination, because there's no leadership within the organization of that team, because everybody trying to be a star. That's something they always say Trinidadian footballers suffer from. Everybody want to score a goal, but nobody want to defend. All right. So think about it from that perspective. A band leader has to go through all of that to be able to pull together the best out of everybody working with them. And at the end of the day, very few people might really look towards that band leader as being the key performer. In fact, they may, on the day themselves, they may be just sitting in the back there playing a rhythm guitar thing. because they're just paying attention to the overall sound, the overall arrangements, making sure all the artists that they're supporting is comfortable and is hearing what they need to hear, getting the best out of everybody, paying attention to if some one of the members is having a problem, whether or not he could cover for them in the meantime. All of those things make up that whole leadership definition that they're trying to get to. All right. So if any of you all play pan in school and stuff like that, were members of your school's pan side or anything along those lines?
Yeah, I
Yes,
played
sir.
a while back.
Miss Brown?
Yes, I
Yeah.
played pan.
Which pan did you play?
The tenor.
Yeah. So you're like these guys here. The tenor is synonymous with the first line of violin in the orchestra. Because you'd
Yes,
recognize
that's
that
frontliners. Yes,
yeah, and you have the double tenors, the single tenor, right? The
correct.
double tenor. Then what? Tell me, what are some of the other pans that are there? We actually have a pan called a cello pan, not so, Miss Brown? Hello, Miss Brown?
I don't know.
You don't know. All right.
I know
So
the
you're right. You have the bass. You have the bass.
yes,
You have the cellos. You have guitar pans. You know that, right? The guitar pans are supposed to be kind of half. The Not quite half, a little longer than a half, but they're supposed to do strumming. That's what they used to talk about, strumming. Then you have double tenors. You have another pan, a double seconds. So it's the same setup like what we're seeing in front of us here, but using pans as the instrument. Plus, they would include percussion and drums and so on to keep timing and all that type of stuff. So, yeah, we understand that the definition here that Dupree is trying to put together of the jazz band leader or the music leader is a very interesting metaphor that should bring to bear the complexity of what leadership is all about and the nuances of all the different things that are required for a leader to get involved with in order to get the best out of people, to get the best performance. And that's the objective. The objective is to make sure that whatever the performance is, everybody enjoys it. But at the end of the day, um, what we're looking at here is this metaphoric definition that Dupree put together to try and explain what leadership is all about. Making sense so far? All right. So Dupree's leadership jazz metaphor is powerful and illustrative, illustrating inclusiveness, valuing individuality, showing the importance of the public good, that is the show and everybody being happy, empowering people to realize their gifts and talents, which means they need to make people believe in themselves to be able to bring out the best in them. All right, this is such a powerful metaphor, and it works for me because I have a little background in music myself, so I could connect with this. But for everybody who may not necessarily have this type of music background, maybe one of the other metaphors that we spoke about before might appeal to you. So this is what I was saying to you. If you can find a connection with one of the metaphors, this is what they're hoping you will be able to do. Use one of the metaphors to get an understanding of what or how complex the concept of leadership is all about. All right. Okay. So um, another metaphoric definition is called the episodic concept of leadership, and this might fall into Victoria's situation here. Leadership is episodic, meaning that as a manager, not all of the times that you're at work would you be engaged in leadership activity. A lot of the times you might be involved in operational activity, but ever so often you engage in some sort of leadership activity. It's episodic. A little 5 minutes here, 10 minutes there. I think that, for example, leadership does not occur routinely in people's lives during every moment that they are working or volunteering. People do leadership episodically. 10 minutes here, half an hour there, 15 minutes now, maybe or 2 hours later. It depends on what activity you're getting up to. You're running a meeting, that's leadership. Um, you're prepping for the meeting, that might be a half an hour that you put aside. That's a leadership activity in terms of preparing for further leadership activities. You talk to an employee, you give instructions, that's leadership, right? You sit down there and you work out the roster for the thing, that's not leadership, that is just operational. All right, so there are different things, and it's kind of important to understand that too. Leadership is not something you constantly engage in. You'd have, or else you'll burn out. That'll be the problem that takes place there. You'll just kind of burn out with it. Leadership takes place in little episodes here and there or across the board. All right. So leadership is described as being complex and elusive. It's multidisciplinary in nature, and it is has been examined by lots of different walks of academic studies. Science had a crack at it. Um, Behavioral sciences, in particular, likes to look at leadership because it's something that we want to understand. Um, People come to leadership from, especially some of the books that are out there, they come to leadership from experience and from almost anecdotal type of activities that they make observations. So you see a lot of these social influencers, for example, talking about their leadership experiences and trying to, encourage people in leadership activities by looking at their own past histories and so on. All right, so one of the things that we're going to be paying attention to is the development of the theories of leadership. So just before we get into this, because this is where we kind of midway through, we're going to spend the most amount of time this evening on is looking at all of these different theories. Um, I want us to take a little 10 minutes. Let me get something to drink because I try almost choking here myself. Take 10 minutes, take a stretch, and then we'll come back. All right. I'm just gonna pause, not the recording. I'm just gonna pause. We'll be back here by I have almost 6:50. Let's say 7 o'clock. We should be okay. Everybody's all right with that?
Yes,
Yes.
sir.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you very much, guys. All right, guys, we're back. Everybody's here. All right. Can I get restarted?
Yes, sir.
All right, cool.
Yes,
Okay,
yes.
so we're going to be looking at these theories that have been developed. Some of them will be dealt with by other people in a lot more detail than I'm going to be doing tonight. And if we have enough time, there's a little video I have that kind of summarizes everything. If there's not enough time, what I'll do is I'll copy the link and put it in the chat so you guys could look at it on your own. So, so this first theory here is called the great man theory. So this theory is probably one of the first theories that was generated to explain leadership, and it was influenced heavily by Darwinist thinking at the very beginning of the 19th century. So anybody is familiar with what Darwin proposed in his first set of theories? Anybody?
So,
Uh-huh. Nakio, you said something. I didn't quite make out what you're saying.
also, I said I'm not familiar with his theories in particular.
Okay.
I know it. I just can't remember right now, sir. I know it.
You know it. Natural selection, survival of the fittest.
Yes, what's again? Something else.
He started the theory on evolution.
Yes.
Right. Okay. So those were the theories or the Darwinist approach to science is what dominated. So one of the things that we're going to look at is what was the prevailing thought or thinking processes or heavily influential movements that helped to shape the concepts that we're looking at here. Now, the great man theory is actually based on a lot of folklore. So it starts with the great man folklore is based upon the concept of a set of brothers who were kings, and they were ascribed, that particular family was ascribed to having a set of special abilities that gave them influence over the people. They became the leading or regal ruling class of that society, and that society required that they maintained their blood so that only people related to that family, direct offspring from that family, could take up positions of leadership. So if we think about this from a very uh, well, uh, if we think about this from the concept of some of the folklore stories that developed out of the time frame, we could think about, for example, King Arthur. So, any of you all familiar with that whole story of King Arthur and Excalibur?
Yeah.
So this is kind of like where that whole idea comes from. So only a particular group of individuals who could have wielded that sword were eligible for to be the king or to be the leader of that particular group of individuals. The problem with that theory, however, is that it ignored women because it was very myopic in its view and only saw men as being the holders of the power of being kings. Now, if you think about this, we have a lot of countries that were dominated by ruling classes that were royal in nature. They were called royal blood. Um, and what you ended up happening was a lot of intermarriage taking place within the family, which obviously we know now creates a big problem with genetical diseases that would develop because of inbreeding. Um, so that intermarriage of cousins and nieces and nephews and sometimes even more closely related people, of course, led to a lot of problems with the physicality of these individuals coming up, and a lot of them are mentally unstable. Another aspect is that the theory only talked about men; it doesn't talk about women. So women such as Joan of Arc, Catherine the Great, even Queen Elizabeth, they were abnormalities that the theory could not explain. Why did they come up as being leaders? And then some people started to explain more. They came up as leaders because they had the blood in them. So you might also relate this to the Knights Templars and their crusade for the Holy Grail could be related to this folklore that comes up with this. Any of you all ever saw the Da Vinci Code, that film?
That movie is very, I don't know.
Weird. It's actually based off another book called The Holy Brother and the Holy Grail. We should check it out, look at it, and try and understand that a lot of the stuff coming from that is some of the stuff that sits at the background of this great theory. So again, it's scientific in nature, but it's based upon the concept that a particular group of individuals would rise to being the ruling class because of something in their genes. And this is where the whole concept of you the to be a leader, you have to be born a leader. You can't change. You can't become a leader if you're not born with it. Eventually, by the end of the 1900s, the great man theory gave way to something called trait theory or trait approach. And in the traits approach, what it says is that there's a set of traits that exists that make people or give them potential for leadership. And interestingly enough, if you look at this quotation, it's assumed that leaders had particular traits such as intelligence, height, self confidence that differentiated them from non-leaders and thus made them successful. Now, what they're not talking about is the the darker aspect to this trait theory, which was you had to first of all be white. So it's white. You had to be of a particular intelligence level. Had to be tall, blue-eyed, blonde hair. You had to have that background. And this, of course, is where you have a different set of sciences called eugenics, which is the sort of the forerunner for genetic studies and genetic engineering that drove a lot of thinking at this particular time to produce people who were of this particular Aryan quality that therefore made them natural leaders in the world around them. The problem with this, of course, is that research into this trait theory failed to produce this list that ensured that these characteristics would give rise to successful leaders. Um, a host of different issues here that come up with this because based upon this kind of concepts, for example, and you'd notice you talking about the beginning of the 1900s, the 19th century, you're talking about theories that led to some very dangerous activities that took place during World War II, where leaders at that point in time believed in this eugenics concept and actually actively participated in experimentation to prove this theory being right. And during the um, the German War or World War II, you'd hear a lot of atrocities were committed on various people in the world in relation to this idea that if you breed people in a particular manner, they would develop these traits. So for a fairly long time, and in fact, a lot of people still give this trait theory some sort of merit, um, and it's currently supported by some of the genetic stuff that's coming along. That's there that speaks to this type of activity. It's something that you all could look into, but understand again, the theory is supported by the common thinking, the mode of thinking, and especially at the level of scientific research it supported one another sort of thinking. But of course, there's a very dark side to that that is not spoken about in the textbooks. Now, coming out of that period, and this actually was out of after the World War II, which ended in 1945, we started to have a behavioral approach to trying to look at what was taking place. What what were the behaviors of people in of good successful leaders? What were they doing that made them successful? And those theories. Somebody's trying to get in. Um, Welcome back, Victoria. Right. So these um, these theories here, where are we? Right. So basically, they use a psychological approach or psychiatry to kind of make observations, and you'd notice a lot of the models started up in the 1950s and 60s. It's because for that period of between 1918 to 1945, the world was caught up in war, and it took a while, of course, to get back started. Now, what developed in the 1950s and 1960s was heavy industrialization, because after World War II, a lot of Europe was flattened, and United States was the became the productive hub of the world. So they were doing the most amount of manufacturing, and that required to get England, Germany, and all of the European countries kind of rebuilt after being destroyed during World War II. So what you found happening is that there was a lot of emphasis in industry and factory work. So you found that a lot of the theories would go into these factory situations and try to, or these industrialized areas of activity, and try to observe what good managers were doing. So they developed a few models. So the Ohio State and University of Michigan produced what is called the two dimensions of managerial behavior, which is called considering and initiating structure. And basically, consideration had to do with any sort of actions that a manager might take that seemed to be friendly and supportive of the individuals with whom they worked, whereas initiating structure was the actions that a leader would take towards achieving the goals of the organization. So they were looked upon as being independent of each other, and therefore you could score high in both, or you could score low in one and high in the other. They were trying to work out, therefore, what sets of behaviors um, they could, observe taking place in these industrial estates that would support the theory and therefore give some sort of explanation as to what is going on. Blake and Morton, they came up with another approach. Same thing, concern for people, concern for production, more clear in the language here. And of course, what they did was looking at the behaviors of managers and leaders, and categorized it as those that exhibited concern for people as opposed to those that looked at concern for production. Um, and their research concluded that effective managers shows high concern for people and production, so no really discernible advantage for one or the other. Michigan studies, they included the identification of a different model. And this model has three different types of behaviors that they were looking at: task-oriented behaviors, relationship-oriented behaviors, and participative leadership. So again, each one of these models that they were generating was looking specifically at the behavior of the individual in the leadership position and tried to make linkages between those behaviors and the success or failure of that manager or managers. Problems with these approaches was that they were very simple in their approach. It couldn't handle the complexity of what leadership was all about, and most of the results that they drew from that research was very inconclusive in nature and inconsistent. So it proved itself to be an inferior type of situation. Now, one of the things they observed from conducting that behavioral thing was that they the 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 models that they created ignored the circumstances in which the activities were being practiced. So, to fix that, they developed the situational contingency approaches, which really put some emphasis now on where the leadership activity was taking place, so that they had to pay attention to the impact of the situation or the context in which this leadership was being practiced. All right, and therefore they had to pay attention now to how does that situation impact upon the behaviors. So because the behavioral strict behavioral was being inconclusive in nature, what they said, okay, we have to pay attention also to the situation in which we are observing these individuals. So therefore, they tried to bring that particular theorem or thinking into the observation and tried to develop their theories based on that. So they developed two major contingency theories: as the least preferred coworker model, which describes how the situation moderates the relationship between leaders, traits, and effectiveness, and the path goal theory, which originated in 1957, and they posited that here we go. Here it is. If a group member perceives high productivity to be an easy path to attaining their personal goals, then they will tend to be high producers. But if personal goals are obtained in other ways, they will not likely be high producers. So in essence, what they were saying is that the leader, if he recognizes this issue, he would try to ensure that any activities they get engaged in, they have to encourage the worker to see their actions as being beneficial at a personal level. So this actually laid the foundation for what some of you all might be recognizing already as motivational theories, because here what you're talking about is trying to put incentives in place to be able to get your workers to be more productive. So that path goal theory started that level of thinking, and then Maslow's theory affects that as well. I say Maslow's theories, and I'm assuming everybody says is familiar with Maslow's theory of hierarchy of needs. You all are familiar with that?
Yes, sir.
Yes,
Most of,
sir.
all
Yes.
right. So when I use that there, you'll understand that this kind of harkens back to looking at that hierarchical needs of individuals. The first one being the most basic needs, food, clothing, shelter. Then you have the highest level, which is self-actualization. So this theory kind of speaks to what was taking place there. But again, this is all taking place inside a focus of industrialization. All right. Problems with these theories, of course: lack of supporting research and unclear associations between the commitment and competence of subordinates and their levels of development. So obviously these theories have some problems. And again, we have to think the context now is 50s and 60s. Everybody's, working away at these factories and these industries, high industrialization activities, a lot of stuff going on there. Now, another set of theories that started in 1924, was interrupted by the war, has to do with influence theory, and that speaks to, primarily, it looks at the impact of um, this thing, those exceptional qualities that individuals are endowed with: charisma. All right. Now, Max Weber, or Weber, depending upon how you want to pronounce it, but Max Weber was a German, and he was interrupted in his studies because of World War II, and part of World War One as well. But what he was using here, he was observing what was taking place in Germany at the time, um, to look at the impact that charisma had on the the vision of what a manager or leader looks like. So what he started to look at, and other people started to support his studies later on, was that this concept of charisma was very powerful, and this is one of the reasons why a lot of managers tried to differentiate themselves and look different to the other people in on the factory floors. So you'd notice that if you look at a lot of the movies out of the 50s and stuff like that, anybody who was in a manager position, they would have long, they would always be wearing jackets and ties. They would be in the office, and they would be apart and away from the individuals, but they would also be very strong, charismatic individuals who are able to convince the workers, especially if you think about people like Henry Ford and stuff like that. They became larger than life characters. Now, Max Weber and them were looking at that charismatic leader, and then Robert House started to formalize the approach in by the 1970s, and he tried to look at the testing for that, trying to check for charismatic leadership can be explained by a set of testable variables. And it again, because charisma is not something that's attributed to the leader by his own actions. It's actually what other people see in somebody else. And they were able to draw the conclusion that primarily what took place in charisma, or deals with, or what helps with charismatic leaders or leadership, has to do with the context in which it's taking place. They found that charismatic leaders who are able to orate well, speak well, tend to rise up during times of crisis, and they because they're providing a solution to problems, especially when those solutions challenge the status quo, these individuals have a tendency to rise into those positions of charismatic leadership. And I think I have some I had some pictures of various charismatic leaders that we could look at in relation to that. But the idea is that the problem with charismatic leadership is that left unchecked, charismatic leaders have had a lot of negative impact. Now, there have been really good, positive, charismatic leaders. We could think of a good few positive ones, people like John F. Kennedy. Um, we have who again? You could think of
I think
Barack
Obama
Obama.
was
Yep,
charismatic,
he was
sir.
very highly charismatic. Yep. Um, uh, who again? This guy was charismatic until he got caught with his pants down. Um, Clinton. He was well liked by the majority of
Yeah,
the
yes, he
population.
was.
All
That's
right,
true.
and it's just when that his philandering, even when he was philandering, that which is one of the reasons why today he's still quite popular on the talk circuit, still quite popular there because of his likability. Um, but all of these individuals, Ronald Reagan, for example, was also seen as very charismatic. But remember, he had a lot of practice with that because he was an actor. He came from Hollywood. So all of these individuals rising to positions of power, some of them had very good impacts on the society that they worked with, but a lot, unfortunately, had very negative impacts. And here we could think about people like Hitler, we could think about Stalin, and we talked about Mao before. We could talk about it on a smaller scale, like with these cult leaders that we talked about before. You have a whole number of them, like Jim Jones and the Branch Davidians, and you have a whole host of these guys outside there. The problem with it is that they there's a tendency for people who get involved with highly charismatic individuals that they don't challenge the direction that the leaders are going, and they tend to utilize that charismatic power to do really negative things, and nobody questions their decision making, and that is where the problem of charismatic leadership is. It's one of the reasons why the theories kind of got held in place after a while. So then, by the end of the 1970s, or by the end of the 1960s into the 1970s, we had another shift taking place in society. So before we get to reciprocal leadership theories, the background is what is happening in the world at that point in time. So you have the you have Vietnam War going on. You had the conclusion, I should say, of the the Korean War and the start of the the Vietnam War. You had the draft taking place in the United States, which a lot of people were against, um, and that's the military draft. You had the oh boy, you had the rise of rock and roll music. You had the creation of birth control that led to a what we call sexual freedom. You also had the rise of female liberation movements. You had the rise of the civil rights movement. So you had a lot of social unrest taking place alongside certain elements of free love, and you had the hippie community starting up, or what they call the flower power people, and there was the use of a lot of drugs, and people were using acid and that type of stuff, and getting into a whole host of different activities. So you had this kind of psychedelic activities taking place in the 1970s. Uh, um, most of the early 70s, you had a lot of that stuff taking place out of the 60s and the 70s. Now, one of the things that took place also was an sort of exploration of Eastern culture. So you had a lot of these band leaders and musicians traveling to India and traveling to, well, not China so much, but Japan, and observing the religious behavior there in terms of Hinduism, Buddhism, Confucianism, all of those different um, religious beliefs and meditation and all that type of stuff impacting upon a lot of people's thinking processes. And this is where reciprocal theories started to get developed back in that time frame. And you'd notice that it refocused the attention of the analysis of leadership on to not only looking at the leader, but looking at the relationship between leaders and followers. That's why it's called reciprocal leadership theory. So it had to do with observing and realizing that nobody can do anything as a leader if they can't motivate their followers. So a lot of reciprocal theories developed out of that, and of course it makes a lot of sense. So you had this mutual movement. It's also driven by distrust of the status quo leadership, which is the maximum style leadership, um, because nobody trusted, at least I'm not just say nobody. People didn't trust um, President Johnson, they didn't trust President Nixon, and there's a lot of anti-establishment movement also taking place. So you had a lot of social revolutions taking place, and that was also supported by that one love culture, women's freedom rights movements. All of those things kind of mushroom together to create this period of revolution. So that's the nature was going on, right? So all the theories that came up and evolved around this time frame, evolved around this concept of we are together working collectively towards higher goals. So we are trying to be better than what our previous leaders did. So things like sometimes here we go. Rather leadership is a process that meaningfully engages leaders and participants, values the contribution of those participants, shares power and authority between leadership and participants, establishes leadership as an inclusive activity among interdependent people. So the focus is shifting away from only looking at what the leader does and how the leader behaves and what the leader's bloodline is. All of those things become passe, and we start to focus on the relationship that is generated between leaders and followers and how they are able to work together towards achieving these lofty goals, and more importantly, those goals and values being driven by being honest, open, and highly ethical. So those are the things that drive the various theories that were developed during this particular time frame. So y- there are three primary main theories, and you have the transformational leadership theory, the servant leadership theory, and the followership theory. They all speak about the same thing. There is one group that is going to do a good amount of analysis and presenting the servant leadership model, and I want to make sure that they're from the I think that when they're doing power and influence, I think is where you're going to come across this theory. I want to make sure that you all cover that really well. But all of these theories really speak to the same kind of thing. The leader is no longer the focal point of the organization, but it's really what the leader does with other people that that drives the theory. So transformational leadership theory, this is Burns' theory here, um, is one about leaders not manipulating but motivating and inspiring their followers to be able to lift each other to higher levels of ethical behaviors and ethical objectives. So again, this is also where you had the emergence of the green thinking as well. It started to emerge in this particular time frame as well. So again, you have the same movement towards um, higher values, higher ideals, values such as liberty, justice, equality, peace, and humanitarianism. So leaders are using those things to appeal to people, not the fear, greed, jealousy, and hatred. And you know, it's quite interesting. If you look at campaign um, the campaigning of political parties, you could actually, you know, evaluate them from the position of who are those parties or leaders that are trying to appeal to people's higher thinking and higher moral values than those that are honing in on, well, you better vote for me or else this person will come in and they will do this to you and they'll do that to you. And that kind of fair thing is something that I see coming back again in in the last couple of elections, both in the United States and here in Trinidad. We tend to utilize that sort of like vote for me or you'll get them, and that kind of us and them behavior doesn't speak well to us having transformed our leadership potentials or thinking in the country. Um, so the transformational leadership theory really focuses on that attention to what is happening between leaders and followers, and everybody is working towards very high ideals, and we have a lot of transparency in what we're doing. Now let's go to the next theory. So I don't have to. All right. So these are transformational leaders here, all of them, and some of them charismatic as well. We've met most of these before in other photos. The new ones on the thing here. This is Abraham Lincoln. This is John F. Kennedy, and this lady here is Mother Teresa. Now it's interesting that of all of these people here, four of them were assassinated because of the transformation that they encouraged. Um, Again, we had, for example, Abraham Lincoln. He was assassinated because of his movement away from slavery. Um, Mahatma Gandhi was assassinated because of the movement towards independence from India and unfortunate separation of Pakistan. John F. Kennedy because he stood against the status quo, and a lot of people were very afraid of direction he was taking. He was also probably one of the brightest moments in his thing was when he made that speech about ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. That speech kind of set the tone for his entire thing. Although I mean he's also known for some other types of activities, um, not necessarily good ones, but it was kept very private. And then you have Martin Luther King. He was assassinated because of the movement in the civil rights movement, and he was again threatening the status quo of the status of black people in the United States, and of course the influence that he had on countries outside the United States in terms of that black power movement that took place as well. The other two individuals, this is Roosevelt. He's here because he was able to transform the entire United States. He was able to pull that country out of um, the Great Depression, if you all remember, from the 1930s, which was right after World War One. The United States went into this massive. It wasn't only the United States. It happened all around the world. The Great Depression, but the worst of it was probably seen there. But he was able to utilize various policies to drag the country out of that depression into economic boom periods, primarily governed by production taking place from the war. So war benefited him. And of course, most of you should be familiar with Mother Teresa, who built her life around empowering and enriching the lives of poor people in India, poor children in particular. She had a lot of work that she did there because India is one of those countries in the world that has a very high level of poverty, and it impacts upon children in the most. Them getting access to clean water, food, schooling, education, medicine, and any sort of healthcare and stuff was something that was very difficult. So her movement in transforming the world, especially in India, in relation to this, is something that she was recognized internationally for. So these are all transformational leaders. These are people who they work together, not by themselves, but they were able to get other people to work well with them through humility, being honest, being open. That's the kind of thing that we're trying to present there. All right. Another aspect of the theories that we're looking at here is transformational with transactional leadership. So basically, transactional leadership is the type of leadership you might be accustomed to. It's techniques that you might have utilized on a regular basis, or was utilized with you, where your parents might, for example, tell you, like, if you get this done, if you do this, you'll get that. That's a transactional thing. It happens at work as well. If you get this done, then you get a bonus here. So that's sort of motivational theory that comes up again there. Transformational leadership, on the other hand, has to do with, as a leader, you motivate people and inspire them to want to do things even though it may be painful for them. And that's a big difference in terms of the styles of leadership, or the theories of leadership. Transactional leadership is seen as one that works very easily in the corporate world, because you work for a living, you earn an income, and therefore when the boss says, okay, we need to do X, Y, Z, and you get bonuses with it, you get bonus pay, or you get bonus days off, some CTO, that kind of stuff. Those kind of things encourage people to work harder, creating initiatives for them to do that. Transformational leadership, however, requires that you get people to do things despite the fact that it may not actually give them any sort of physical or financial rewards, but they feel inspired by you as the leader to work towards this particular change. And that's something that is really important in organizations that are going through serious change. All right. But the nature of it is that you can utilize both techniques, both transformational or transactional, depending upon what works for the period there. All right. So that's something that they started to talk about there in the theories. Now the problem with the theories that we talked about, these transformational relationship theories, is it lacks a um, focus on its overall lack of clarity on specific issues. So again, it's kind of what, as I like to say, there was so much drugs going on that people couldn't focus, so there was no clarity, there was no specifics that you could nail down. People were just kind of blurry and high. In terms of how these theories were developed. The servant leadership theory um, moves this even further, where the leader is seen as a servant to everybody else, So the job of the leader is to serve others in order to empower them to be to themselves become leaders in the future. Now this servant leadership theory is going to be dealt with hopefully by one of the groups in a lot more detail, but the concept is very similar. It is about a leader positioning themselves as the servant of everybody else so that the board of directors and everybody view themselves as holding their institutional organization in trust for the people to come after. All right, so it's almost like succession planning. And the nature of that type of leadership means that you have to empower everybody below you to be able to do all the things that you can do plus more. Okay, that type of servant leadership thinking is something that is really important. In fact, I think at one point in time, um, the UNC attempted this in their first, well, I should say the UNC, the president, prime minister, sorry, prime minister, what's her name again? Besessa attempted this when they first came to office in, oh, I can't remember, 2010, I think it is. If you remember, the phrase that she always utilized was service, service, service. And that is you're in a position of leadership. Your job is to serve the population, to build them up. But that service had to be to build people up, to empower them, to give them the skills and tools required to help to build their lives up. Unfortunately, I don't think the vast majority of her party saw that approach as being something that they like. The status quo kind of bucked against it because she had too many people who were in the organization that were more enamored with the more traditional view of leadership and not the servant leadership view. So this is another theory that emerged in terms of the reciprocal nature of leadership that they talked about. So this is one, as I said, there's a group that's going to be dealing with this in more details. I'm not going to spend too much time here. Um, so we can move to the followership theory. Um, so we kind of met this when we looked at some diagrams in the past. From last week, you should have seen it. There was a diagram there with Kelly, and he defined followership in the context of the alienated followers, the sheep, the yes people, survivors, and effective followers. So the idea here is that as a leader, your job is to move people into being effective followers. These are people who are highly actionable and are critical thinkers, and not leave people in the sheep and yes man type of behaviors. You want and mostly at the alienated followers. This is utilized more when you start to think about it from a political standpoint, because based upon how you feel about the politics of the country, you have a lot of people who are alienated. So if you've been paying attention to the last couple of elections, we've had, um, I think in the last election, we had something like 53% turnout overall. That means a lot of people. Was it 53 or 43? There was one year it was really bad. It was something like 35% of the population voted out of the entire voting population of Trinidad and Tobago. That meant that more than half the people of the country were alienated by the political system and political leadership. Um, in that group now of people who actually voted, you have the sheep, they just follow along blindly. You have the yes man, whatever the leaders say you do. You have the survivors, the one who is trying to be independent thinkers and action workers. Those are the kind of things, and of course, a lot of effective followers, or some of them are effective followers. So the idea is that we have to be looking at in this theory, it is the idea of the leader's job to try and move people out of those unthinking on critical thinking people? Yes, Miss Jones. See your hand up.
Yes, I don't know if she knows, but Victoria, your camera on.
Wow. Okay. Know that. Right. And she's walking around. Thank you. I didn't see that. All right. So we understand
Thank
the.
you.
All right.
No
Cool.
problem.
All right. So we understand this concept of the followership theory. So the idea here again is always going to be developing effective followers, and effective followers have these skills here, these qualities. They manage themselves well. They're committed to the organization. Um, they do self development. They're courageous. They're honest. They're credible. More importantly, they question the leader and hold the leader up to scrutiny, and make sure that they don't do things that are negative, or they pull they pull a leader up. They say, hey, you can't do that, you can't do this, can't, that kind of stuff. So that followership theory holds both parties up to a lot of um, a lot of a lot of high quality value. So these are the reciprocal theories that came up there. Now, here we have to get into the paradigms, and I spoke about this paradigm before, because all of the theories that we looked at so far were built under the paradigm or created in the early part of the 20th century under the industrial paradigm model. Now, that industrial paradigm model kind of it has to do with, in terms of preparing the workforce and preparing your leadership, you're preparing them for work in factories and in industry. All right, so everything is focused from that perspective. The problem is that the industrial era is over, and we are now in a different era. All right, in the 21st century, we are in the information age, and the transition was painful. In fact, in Trinidad, I still find us our education system actually seems to be very industrial focused still, in terms of the way a lot of our secondary and primary schools are designed. They don't encourage critical thinking from an early age. In fact, it's squashed. Creativity is also something that is not encouraged, and to a great extent, innovation. All of those things that we speak to as being really critical um, to the current paradigms that we're working under, the industrial information age. Sorry, not the industrial, the information age, is things that the education system has been slow to adjust towards. And therefore, we still have remnants of this industrial age holding our systems back. All right. And in fact, it's still reflected in some of the policy arrangements that a lot of our ministries work under, our systems operate under. Now, leadership theory in the 20th century mirrors that industrial era. And so that theories, therefore, were structurally functionalist, management oriented, personalistic in focus only on the leader, goal achievement dominated, self interested, and individualistic in outlook, male oriented, utilitarian and materialistic in ethical perspectives, and rationalistic, technocratic, linear, quantitative, and scientific in language and methodology. Now, if any of you all ever get the opportunity to go back and look at some of those models that we talked about, the amount of maths and stats that's utilized to describe these things, you have to be a mathematician really to understand those theories and their development. My dad used to do some of that work when he was doing some of his studies, and I remember going through some of the textbooks and in leadership that he was dealing with, and I was looking at those models and some of these things look awful, full of high level statistical analysis and nothing about behavioral characteristics and all these observational tools going on here and one set of correlation and it was a it was a lot of madness from my but so that's when they say linear and quantitative and scientific and language. It wasn't user friendly, and it's a lot of it still is not user friendly. All right, it's only the latter part that started to get really more people focused or soft focused as they talk about. All right. So this transformation that is required in the reciprocal theories themselves have actually allowed for that shift away from the industrial paradigm because they switch focus away from the leader into focus on the relationship, and relationships are soft things. They're not. You can't use mathematics to measure relationships. um, you have any? You all have partners that measure your relationships mathematically. You ever heard the mathematics of a wife? Never heard those jokes? I'm not gonna get into
No,
them, but
sir.
no, no. Look around for it. See if you can find it. The mathematics of marriage. All right. So, of course, a more integrated approach is going to be utilized for contemporary leadership theory. So that's not something we're going to be paying attention to. Now, so what's the world like now? The world like to now is faced with unprecedented economic, technological, social, political, moral, and ethical tumultuous sea of change. There's a need for new theories, new applications, and just new thinking about leadership. So this brings us into the concept of what we what we have to deal with now, and this is chaos theory, because this is what I was talking about. Much of what was taught us in schools, especially in my time frame, and in some of your time frame, would have been to prepare us for that industrial age. The problem with it is that we were always taught to be neat and tidy because the world is an orderly place. The problem is we knew from experience that the world is messy and very little order is available. There's I always feel I don't know how many, anybody here has OCD or suffers from any form of obsessive compulsive behavior. Miss
I
Jones?
am somewhat OCD.
All right, so that's Miss Brown. Okay. Anybody else?
To some degree, yes, to some degree.
All right, that's good. That's good. Now, there
I
are
think
people. Yes, go ahead.
I think every accountant has OCD.
Right. Yes, accountants have a tendency to be this way too. That's quite true. Anybody with accountancy, um, obviously because of the nature of how accountants supposed to work, but then your field has a lot of things to answer for. We'll talk about that in another time. But the world is not this nice, neat place. The, the world is messy. In fact, that leads us into this whole concept. The world is chaos. And that therefore brings us into chaos theory. So for most of you all probably came across this. Chaos theory is absolutely unmanageable type of thing, actually. So it's something that one of the things that the leadership theories that we have to look at is that they have to be able to deal with change. Yes, Candace.
Oh,
Senior mic open.
sorry.
No, it's okay. Did you have a question you want to ask?
No, I was just gonna say I remember Kia Cherry from Jurassic Park.
Well, okay. That's the butterfly, the thing that the guy talked
One of
about with
one of these scientists was a chaos theory scientist.
yes. That was what's his name again? What's the actor's name? Um, uh, Goldberg, the kind of evil, kind of halfway evil guy. Anyway, chaos theory actually is something that we have to pay attention to because most of the theories have to deal with this world that we live in, world full of rapid change, and we could understand that. I mean, because if you think about just the technology that we're using, um, I mean, we've gotten into a situation where there's so much change taking place so rapidly on a regular basis that to get yourself settled into any particular set of technologies is a mistake because technology ages so fast. Like I am looking around me. I have a printer. I have a PC. I have various devices around me, and a lot of the devices I purchased brand new at the beginning of the pandemic or during the pandemic period, and a lot of them are already become obsolete. This printer, for example, is obsolete. Um, God, this microphone is an ancient design. There's a whole host of different things that are taking place around us that we need to be able to stay abreast. But how do we stay abreast without losing our minds in the whole thing? Now, so let's look at chaos has been defined as order without predictability. And this is really interesting. There are two important characteristics that is inherent with unpredictability, while another is that there's a hidden pattern. So this is the problem with chaos. Chaos appears to be unpredictable, but given enough time of observation, you will see a pattern of behavior in that chaos. The problem is we live in the moment. We live where the change is taking place. We are not able to, in the larger sense, to sit back and observe the chaos and see that hidden pattern. And a lot of science has gone into observing this chaos system and chaos theory. So you'd see it working from that particular way. Now, there are a couple of things that they talk about that you have to pay attention to in this world of chaos theory or chaos systems. And that is one of the first things you have to look for is always understand how to organize yourself in situations of change. And the first thing that they talk about is that the basic concepts to be successful is to be, first of all, sensitive to the initial conditions, also called the importance of initial conditions. Implied implies that how something begins greatly determines where it ends up. So if we think about the end of 1990 into 1920, where the pandemic started here in Trinidad for us, all right, that is an initial condition. And if we paid attention to how that started, it will tell us a lot about where we're going to end up. Okay? I remember when it first started, I mean, the college was at an absolute loss. Um, and we had to make changes very quickly. And the students also had to you guys had to make changes very rapidly for that period. How many of you all were bumped from live face-to-face classes into online classes? Not necessarily here at Costat, but where you might have been in secondary school or so on. Any of you all want to
Yes,
tell
sir.
that? Where were you? Miss Jones, tell me where you.
Um, so, well, when I was in secondary school, I think that happened around like Form 4 or so,
Uh-huh.
around that time. And I remember going online. I could only speak for myself. It was a great experience because I think not being in person, I was better able to focus in class and my grades improved.
Mm-hmm.
Because in school, it might have a class clown or so
Yeah.
much things happening all at once
All right.
because you're just overstimulated by everything.
But how
So
was
for
your
me,
home? But what did your home have to do to adjust to that? That
well,
that
at
change.
home, I was able to, it was a bit quiet for me. So when I had school in the morning, it was like at 8 o'clock you sign in, and
Uh-huh.
I had that quiet space for myself and I was able to focus. I didn't
Wow.
have somebody next to me tapping my shoulder to have a small talk, you know? So I
All
was
right.
better able to focus.
All right. Good. And it worked for you. All right.
Yeah, I did.
Okay. Cool. There was somebody else who had mentioned who wanted to share. Who was that? Was it Candace or Mitchell? I'm trying to remember. Anybody else wanted to share your transition stories? Okay, all right. Well, thanks for sharing, Miss Jones, because that's a good transition. But there were some families that couldn't make that transition so easily, because one, first of all, they didn't have the environment nor the equipment. So getting a hold of the equipment was going to be one thing. Plus, getting the services of having Wi-Fi available. And one of the things the government had done at that point in time is that they started to supplement connectivity for students and stuff like that. That was really good because they had to help to encourage the transition that was taking place. In fact, um, the only thing they didn't do was probably try and supply your own laptops and stuff like that, which we have a different administration in place who has that particular idea in place. So the first thing we want to do is be aware and sensitive to the initial condition. The second thing that we have to be aware of is to realize the importance of connections, and they talk about the connections as the concept of andness, and another aspect to it called anding. All right. So when you make a connection with something or someone, you're literally anding with it or them. And unless you and something else get together, you can't do anything. All right. That concept of andness. And with andness comes a realization that in systematic systems or systemic leadership is both and not either or. So what it's trying to say to you is this: anding is critical because a lot of times to find solutions to things that are going wrong, you need to bring things together. Some things may be right and wrong, but you need to take some of the right from the wrong and put it together with another right and wrong and get a partial solution to a problem that you're facing. All right, and that that messiness of pulling together partial solutions from one thing into another, that whole concept is chaos in itself. To find a solution to a problem, you have to bring together something that's not quite right, but you'll take the bit of it that could fit, and you take the bit of something else that could fit, and you pull them together, and you bring something else that kind of could fit, and you pull all that. Now, for somebody with OCD, that's a pain in the butt because if you suffer from that type of compulsive behavior, that will drive you nuts. It'll drive you absolutely bonkers. All right. And the whole concept to this, or the idea that chaos theory is telling us, is that we can't look for one answer. To the problem. There are several answers partially coming from different perspectives and partial solutions that will come together to come up with a better answer than one wrong one, or one that is partially correct. So it makes for a messy life or messy situation. But the reality is that the world around us requires that level of flexibility. And that becomes problematic because human beings like patterns of behavior. We like regular behavior. We like regular activities. We like things done in a particular manner. So you get up in the morning, you do this, you do that, you do that. You don't get up every morning and you're at a loss of what I'm doing today. And that is a kind of tiresome type of activity. But unfortunately, in a chaotic environment, that is the things that you're going to be facing. All right. And the reality is that there are no simple solutions. You have to try and find solutions that would help to fix the problem. So this is sort of like trying to look at our crime problem here in Trinidad. We've been constantly using the same kind of strategies that were utilized in other countries over and over again, and we're trying to fix a problem by throwing money at it primarily, And by doing the same things over and over again, and not really setting up I think, a flexible system that is able to cope with the flexibility of the criminal system, because that's what the strength of the criminal system is. The strength of the criminal system is that it's extremely flexible. If there's a problem here, they move elsewhere. They come around, they find a solution around it. It may not be the best solution, but they are more adaptable. And that's probably the problem that we tend to face from the side of the government and from the side that's trying to find solutions to social problems. The social problems exist in an environment that's highly chaotic, and you're trying to bring a rigid system of organization to try and control something that's absolutely out of control. And that's not necessarily going to be able to work, because you're trying to literally put a sprocket into a mud hole. So all you're going to do is create more mud at the end of the day. All right. Um, so in this chaos system, that's one of the models that they keep on talking about. The problem with the theory that they posited here, of course, is that it sounds vague, right? So this may sound nebulous, but think about how a peer group shapes the behaviors of its participants or the profound impact that a culture has on its society. Now, this is partially what the problem is, because for those of us who are more systemic in our thinking patterns, chaos theory kind of works against it. And therefore, if you have an organization that is more rigid in its structure, it's not going to be able to cope with a system like this. And we saw this happen during the pandemic. We saw that businesses that were highly structured and were unable to make rapid changes failed. They shut down. They lost business. They couldn't survive because they were unable to make the changes necessary to keep themselves alive. All right, and unfortunately, a lot of interesting places fell apart from there. Okay, all right. So let's leave this system alone, and we'll go to this model here. This is probably one of the latest models that evolved in dealing with this. It's called authentic leadership. And interestingly enough, authentic leadership for me is probably the most idealistic model that I've seen being presented. Autistic leadership, and I'll show you why. The autistic leader, sorry, the authentic, I'm saying autistic, my bad. The authentic leader is someone who is confident, hopeful, optimistic, resilient, transparent, moral or ethical, future oriented, and gives priority to developing associates to be leaders. So that's a whole list of very positive attributes that the leader must have. And followers have to be the same thing. All right? Um, Authentic leaders as persons who have achieved high levels of authenticity in that they know who they are, what they believe and value. They act upon those values and beliefs while transparently interacting with others. So, this model is speaking to leaders and leadership activity that is built upon transparency, very high social values, and everybody's acting in everybody else's best interest. And we accept this as being this very high level of authentic behavior. And the problem I have is that this sounds really good. I would love if we can all get together and be this, have this type of leader around us to be in organizations that are highly altruistic and highly positive in its outlook. The problem I have with this model is that unfortunately, it looks very unreasonable and doesn't speak to the reality of the confusion that faces us around us. Um, So, I mean, you all could go through this. These are all the other characteristics they talk about: transparency, openness, trust, guidance towards only worthy objectives, emphasis on follower development. Those are the all the developmental issues that they keep on speaking to. As I said before, this is a really nice, authentic leadership model. Really, really good. I wish this could work, but I don't see it working. Things like this. Authentic leaders do not fake their leadership. Authentic leaders do not take on a leadership role or engage in leadership activity for status, honor, or the personal rewards. Oh, she made it. Okay. Welcome back, Ms. Hodlin. Right. This means the authentic leader has no ego. Authentic leaders are original, not copies. Authentic leaders are leaders whose actions are based on their values and convictions. I mean, some of this is doable, but uh, some of this some of this assumes that somebody could turn off their ego, turn off pride, turn off, and a lot of this I don't think is actually attainable from a honestly, because human nature is human nature. Humans also always want to get things that will benefit them. That's the nature of human nature. And I can't see this as being a really viable method. What I do see it as, though, is an ideal against which we can measure the reality. And the closer we can draw ourselves to this ideal model, the better our society will be. Because until we are able to satisfy everybody's needs, wants, and desires, and also not only just meet their basic needs and desires, but also meet their self actualization, and all aspects of their life, then people are going to be human. They're going to make mistakes. They're going to be selfish. They're going to be hateful. They're going to be jealous. It's just human nature. Again, for me, this authentic leadership comes across like a cult, and it means you have to really suppress a lot of your human reactions to things, and be this almost robotic, um, joy person. Thinking there's a film that has that kind of nonsensical type of activity in it, but it's this is you all ever saw a film called Demolition Man with Wesley Snipes and Sylvester Stallone? Any of you all ever saw that?
Yes.
You all try to remember the society that he came and he met when he woke up.
Um,
Look, right, homework. Go and look at the movie. that's
So
the,
what's the
that's
name again?
It's called Demolition Man with
man.
Wesley Snipes. Wesley Snipes and
So it was like a modern day society, um, like very modern day society.
yeah, but everybody was honest and everybody was did the best to each other and all this kind of stuff.
And
But
there was a lot of technology. Everything was like
yeah,
technology based.
yeah, technology based. But
Everything.
the what was more important was the simplistic way in which people looked at life and the way that they trusted each other so well, so much, and the openness, and nobody did anything wrong. Crime was on an all-time low. Or, so things like that. But our society is not like that. We're not ready for this authentic leadership model. Trust me. It's really sad to say, but I have to say, we're not ready for this. But it is, as I said, it is a model that we could try to aspire towards. That's at the end of the day, that's basically what we could talk about.
So, but I
Uh,
think most of it was based on the style of leadership because the leader was actually hiding what they were doing to
yes, that's the film
create.
you're talking
Yes,
about. Right,
yes.
yeah. Because he was the one who brought back the
So it actually wasn't this perfect society. This,
no, well, he was trying, remember what he was trying to do? He
was
was trying to
trying,
get
yes.
trying to get rid of the rebels that he had in his society, because those
But were
rebels
they
were look.
really rebels? Were they really rebels? I don't
Yeah,
think they
they were
they were
rebelling
fighting to survive.
yeah, but they were also rebelling against the lack of choice, the lack of
Mm-hmm. Correct.
freedom that people had. So
That's
yes,
true.
people had food and they were happy and whatnot, but they didn't have a lot of choice in that movie. Go and look at the movie again, because it's interesting how some of these movies we look at. The Handmaiden's Tale. Did you see any of you all look at that series?
It
And
sounds familiar, but could you give like a brief synopsis?
it's where
Okay.
the main character is this girl who became a handmaiden into a prominent family, and her job
Oh,
was to
yes.
bear children, and the wife would have to be with her while the husband was having sex with her to propagate, um, to what is it called? Basically to have children, to get her pregnant, that kind of stuff. It was an amazing film, but it spoke to another dystopian type of future where where the world was seen as being this even-handed place, but it turned out it had a really dark underbelly. Again, as I said, we are not, as a people, as human beings, we haven't evolved yet to a place where we can have this level of authentic behavior, because we still have dark things in us, um, that we suppress. Fortunately, for the vast majority of us, we suppress our really bad thoughts and negative actions. But there are some people who don't. And unfortunately, some of those people find themselves in positions of power. And when there's no filter or there's no control, these people make for a very interesting, well, not interesting, they make for a very dangerous leader. Think of North Korea, for example. North Korea is led by these dictators they have no filters. There's nobody standing up to the choices that they're making, and they literally do whatever they want. Um, from well, it's really sick. Some of the stuff you hear about that they get up to. Um, I had spoken to you all about the Branch Davidians. The stuff that guy David Koresh got up to was absolutely. I don't understand how educated people let this man do what he did. All right. Anyway, coming back to Marguerite, so again, authentic leadership is, as I said, a really, really powerful theory, but it is as far as I could see, a model that we can aspire towards, and the closer we get, the better we would be. All right, so that kind of brings us to the end of all these theories. But remember, one of the things that we wanted to take away from this, you don't have to go and learn all of this stuff. It's not testable, and there's no exam for this. It is to pay attention to the fact that a lot of these theories have been developed with an underlying influence of prevailing thought at the time. So if we have more changes in the environment that will take place that start to change the way in which we start to think from scientific methods, there will be another transition into a different set of thinking and scientific disciplines that we look at. So you'd notice that every set of theories that existed had was impacted by the thinking that was taking place across the board there. All right. So as I said before, we don't have to go and learn any of this stuff, right? You're not required to go and memorize this. There's no exam. But what I want you to do is to get an appreciation of how theory is developed, and how theory, especially in this area of behavioral theory and social sciences, how the thinking of people is influenced by prevailing thoughts. All right. Take your time, read the chapter over if you get a chance, and you see what you can get with it. But it is a very interesting set of concepts that you could look at. Now, in our next there's not enough time for us to do this. So what I'll do is I'll copy this for you guys into the chat so that you could go and look at this video. So it's like a summary of the is it? Yeah. It's a summary of the things we were just looking at. So just click on the link and it should take you to that thing. And it'll bring some other concepts to mind as well. So um, again, anybody has any questions? I mean, there's a lot of stuff here. And next week, we are going to be going into the meat of things, where we're going to go into the relational leadership theory. That's actually chapter 3, where I'm going to outline that entire relational leadership model and try to bring some degree of understanding to some of it for you. Any questions, guys? Any concerns?
No. Oh, before you go, sir,
Mm-hmm.
um, you have any more recommendations for like shows that would give perspective on what you talked about? Because I actually interested in one of them, Demolition Man, so far.
Well, I spoke about the Demolition Man. I think in in from chapter 1, I recommended something called the Black Klansman to learn about Michael Kwame Ture.
Mm-hmm.
If you looked at that, I spoke about Kwame Ture. So there was a movie called The Black Klansman that actually features him in it. You could look at that. It's kind of funny, but also poignant because at that time he was transitioning his name from Stokely Carmichael into Kwame Ture as a leader in the Black Panther movement, which eventually ended up in Trinidad. Um, what again, boy? Actually, you all could look at something called The Bank Job with Jason Statham. It features a character in it called Malik, who was hung here in Trinidad for what he did to the agent, well, the girl that he brought with him from England, murdered her and buried her in the backyard. I don't know why people do stupid thing like that. Um, he got arrested, and the government of Trinidad and Tobago thing. That's an interesting movie because it's about this heist, but the impact of the heist had to do with some pictures that was taken and had some impact on things. Check DMs. All right. Razia, check your DM on the e-classroom about the group presentation. Hopefully you get that. All right. Okay, so I have 5 minutes left in my meeting time. Anybody has any questions they wanted to ask?
So the group presentations that we have to do we have to
Mhm.
upload that or is it just to present in class alone?
It's the present in class. I will be recording it, and I will then do the because you don't have access to load stuff onto the e-classroom, do you? All right. So I will be doing that on your behalf, because remember that's how we're going to populate the e-classroom with all your presentations going down from chapter 4 onwards. Okay.
Okay.
Cool.
So I didn't get Tegan's number.
Tegan's number is Tegan still here? Anyway, Tegan's number is it's 863 because she's in Barbados. Oh God, 863 887. Something missing here. Yes, no. Tegan is still here. Miss Martin. Okay, she's. I know she's on the WhatsApp chat group, but the the number she typed in here is like it's missing a number. 887. Hold on, let me check it for you. Tegan. All right. So the number I see she's using on WhatsApp here is 246 268 9167. That's on the WhatsApp chat. Did you get that by chance?
Yes, thank you very much.
But this is the number she listed. Crap. Oh, we did. Let me turn off the recording. If I don't have her personal information like this.